There are moments when our strength feels like a thread stretched for too long, where even the slightest touch could break it. We sit there, staring at the tasks that need to be done, the burdens waiting ahead, and realize our hands can no longer grip as firmly as before. That is when many choose to lower their heads and drag themselves through each day, trying to hold on with whatever little energy remains. But I have learned one thing. It is precisely at that moment, when our strength is depleted, that another door opens the door to a power that does not belong to man. The irony is that most of us only realize this when every option of our own has failed. In the years of my faith, I have come to see that human strength is like an oil lamp, bright for a time, but eventually the oil runs out. We can pour in more oil. We can try to keep the flame alive in every possible way. But sooner or later, the fire will fade. The strength of God, however, never runs dry. The difference lies in this. To receive it, we must accept a hard truth that we are not enough. I once thought I was strongest when I could stand on my own, when I needed no one's help, but then came the days when I felt like a traveler in the desert. To my water bottle, empty. No shade in sight. And it was there that I began to understand the true meaning of the Lord's words, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me." Some ask why God lets people reach the point of exhaustion, why He does not give strength from the start. The answer, I believe, is that if our strength never ran out, we would never turn to Him. His strength is not a reward for self-reliance, but the source of life for rightful dependence. I am reminded of the fisherman on the lake, toiling all night without catching anything. When Jesus told him to cast the net once more, it made no sense at all. But when he obeyed, the net was so full of fish it nearly tore. When human strength ends, God's will begins. Resilience is not found in holding out until complete exhaustion, but in the ability to release what we cannot keep and let God hold it for us. Years ago, I tried to overcome my darkest days with reason and discipline. But reason only brought me to a wall. Discipline only kept me standing there longer, while God led me beyond it. There is a kind of strength that comes when we stop trying to prove our worth and start believing that our worth does not depend on achievement or success. That is when we can lift our heads in the middle of the storm and know we are not alone. When strength has run out, I do not see it as failure, see it as an invitation to step into an unfailing source, where every breath is sustained by the one who knew us before we even knew ourselves. And one day, looking back, we will realize that it was in our weakest moments that we were truly strongest, because then the strength within us was no longer ours, but His. Trusting God when everything is clear is simple, but trusting Him when all you see ahead is a thick fog is the true measure of faith. That trust is not built on a feeling of safety, but on the conviction that even when we cannot see, God is still holding our hand and leading us. I am reminded of the image of Jesus in the wilderness. After 40 days without food, His body weary, hunger gnawing at Him, and the devil coming with a seemingly reasonable solution to his immediate need. Turning stones into bread did not sound wrong at first glance, but Jesus answered that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word from the mouth of God. It was a declaration that cut off dependence on what is visible, forcing faith to rise above need and instinct. Trusting God means placing the full weight of your life on Him. Even when instinct urges you to find your own way out, we always want to cling to what we can control. But true faith sometimes demands that we release everything and take a step without knowing where our foot will land. There are storms in life that cannot be predicted and cannot be controlled. The disciples experienced this when the wind and waves rose. The boat rocked. Water poured in, and Jesus was sleeping. They rushed to wake Him, thinking His silence meant abandonment. But He taught that His presence is enough, whether He is asleep or awake. Trusting God is not demanding that he act immediately according to our will, but remaining steadfast even when he has not yet done what we desire. I have come to see a paradox, that sometimes God allows us to stand on the edge of a cliff just to reveal that he is the only ground that will not give way beneath our feet. Such faith is not forged in peaceful days, but in dark nights, when prayers have no answer, when plans collapse, when every familiar road disappears. In those moments, the question is no longer whether we have the strength to go on, but whether we dare to let God decide the direction. Trusting God means accepting that he knows what we do not, and that what he does is always good, even when our hearts cannot yet understand. It is the posture of David before Goliath, when he placed no trust in sword or spear, but in the name of the Lord. He knew that victory did not come from human strength, but from the power of the one he trusted. We are the same. When facing the giants in our own lives, we must remember that the outcome does not depend on the weapon in our hand, but on the hand that is guiding us. Trusting God is not a temporary pause when we are tired, but a decision to live our whole life in the posture of giving him full control. That runs completely against human instinct, but it is the only path that leads to lasting peace. And when we learn this, we will see that faith is no longer a fragile feeling that changes with circumstances, but becomes a solid foundation. Then, every step we take, even through the fog, is a safe step, because the hand leading us has never once lost its way. Prayer is not a habit to be added into an already busy day. It is the lifeline that keeps us from being swept away when the waves crash in. Without it, the soul will gradually grow weak, even if the body remains strong. Jesus did not only preach about prayer, he lived in it. When the weight pressed heavily in the Garden of Gethsemane, when sorrow and fear covered him, he knelt and prayed 3 times until his soul was settled in the Father's will. Prayer does not change circumstances instantly, but it changes a person so they have the strength to walk through them. We often wait until every other option is exhausted before turning to God. Yet he began every decision by being alone with the Father, even before choosing the 12 disciples. This shows that prayer is not an emergency measure, but a constant rhythm. It keeps our minds from drifting with fear and helps us see things in the light of God rather than in the shadow of emotion. Without prayer, we are like a boatman who does not tie his boat to the dock, where even the slightest breeze can push us far away. Prayer does not need to be ornate. It does not need a set formula, but it must be real. It is a conversation between a fragile human and the one who never changes, even when our words are nothing but a sigh. Gud still hears. When Jesus withdrew to a solitary place to pray, he was not seeking isolation because he was tired of the crowds, but to reconnect with the true source of strength. In a world full of noise, if we do not find a quiet place to speak with God, we will soon be swallowed by chaos. Prayer is also a mirror that reflects our own hearts. In talking with God, we realize what is truly taking up space within, what needs to be released, and what must be held on to more firmly. That is why Jesus could walk out from the place of prayer and face his betrayer and the cross without being shaken. That peace did not come from favorable circumstances, but from an unbroken bond with the Father. Prayer is also how we keep our perseverance. Like the widow in the story Jesus told, she kept pleading until she received justice. Jesus used that story to show that persistent prayer is never in vain, and that the Heavenly Father is far more gracious than any judge. If an unjust man would yield to persistence, how much more will a loving Father listen and respond? When a life of prayer becomes the hidden stream that nourishes the soul, we will come to realize one truth, that no situation can break the resilience of someone who is still in conversation with God. At that point, prayer is no longer an extra task, but becomes the source of life. True strength is not the ability to make others bow down, but the courage to kneel and wash their feet. Jesus did exactly that during the Last Supper. In front of disciples who had just been arguing over who was the greatest, he did not deliver a long morale lecture. He took off his outer garment, tied a towel around his waist, knelt down, and washed the dusty feet of each one. That act overturned every reasoning about power. In the eyes of God, greatness does not come from position or fame, but from a heart willing to serve. Serving frees a person from the obsession with themselves. When our eyes are fixed on the needs of others, our own wounds suddenly feel lighter. In the moments when I was most exhausted, it was in helping someone else that I found an energy I could not create on my own. This is the paradox of love. When we give, do we gain? When we keep for ourselves, we are depleted. Serving is also a training ground for humility. The world teaches us to protect our own interests, to avoid small tasks for fear of being looked down upon. But Jesus washed the feet of Judas, the one already planning to betray him. This shows that service does not select only the deserving, but reflects the heart of the one serving. Resilience is forged in the moments we choose to love without return, in the times we help without needing acknowledgement. There is a freedom in service, because when we expect no reward, we are no longer bound by the reactions or attitudes of those we serve. When Jesus multiplied the bread and fish to feed over 5,000 people, he was not only performing a miracle to prove his power, but also teaching that service sometimes requires the faith that God will make up for what we lack. Often, we do not serve because we think we do not have enough, but it is in sharing the little we have that we see God make it abundant. Serving also opens our eyes to the true value of people. In a world that measures worth by achievement, service reminds us that every person, regardless of status or circumstance, deserves to be treated with respect and compassion. This softens the heart, making it harder for it to grow numb to the suffering of others. The strength that comes from serving is not the feeling of superiority, but the calm of one who knows they are living in their true purpose. When we pour ourselves out for the good of others, we stand on a foundation stronger than any fame or wealth, and when service becomes a natural part of life, that strength is no longer something we have to force, but a constant flow from a heart connected to the heart of God. True faith is not the calm when the sky is clear and the wind is gentle, but the ability to stand firm when dark clouds gather and the sea begins to roar. On the boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, the disciples panicked as waves struck the sides. Water poured in, and the danger of sinking became all too real. Meanwhile, Jesus slept. His peace was not because the storm was small, but because he knew the one who controls both the sea and the wind. When he was awakened, he not only rebuked the wind and waves, but also the fear of the disciples. Fear can blind us to the point where we forget that God is still with us, even when he is silent. Faith is not a fragile feeling of optimism, but an anchor in the character of God, in the promise that he will never abandon his children. There are times when God does not calm the storm immediately, because he wants to teach us that true peace does not depend on circumstances, but on his presence. Faith that sees beyond the storm is like the gaze of the woman who had been sick for 12 years, pushing through the crowd just to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. She did not let harsh reality make her give up, but believed that a single moment of connection with him would be enough to change everything. That is faith in action, not just words. And Jesus affirmed that faith when he said it was her faith that had healed her. He also said that even faith as small as a mustard seed could move mountains. The mustard seed is so tiny it is easily overlooked. Yet when planted in the right place, it grows strong. Likewise, faith, no matter how small, when placed in the right one, produces results far beyond our ability. The issue is not the size of our faith, but where we place it. Many look for security and wealth, plans, or personal ability. But when the storm comes, These things all shake. Only God stands firm and keeps us steady. Storm-overcoming faith does not promise that the waves will stop immediately, but it gives us the strength to stand on the deck, to look into the fierce wind, and still know we will not be swallowed. When we live with such faith, we learn how to walk through the tempest with peace in our hearts, not because the storm is gone, but because we know the one who can quiet it at any moment. Forgiveness is a silent victory that only the strongest can achieve. On the cross, with his body tortured and his breath breaking, Jesus still prayed for those who nailed him there, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." This was not a spontaneous reaction from a momentary kindness, but a conscious decision built on the foundation of love and absolute trust in the Father's justice. Forgiveness does not erase the memory of the hurt, but it breaks the chains of resentment that imprison the soul. When we refuse to forgive, we bind ourselves to the past, carrying a burden that the one who wronged us may not even think about anymore. Anger and bitterness can seep in like poison, weakening our capacity to love and stealing our peace. Forgiveness frees us from that cycle, allowing us to move forward without letting old wounds define who we are. It is not an act of weakness or an acceptance of wrong, but an affirmation that justice belongs to God, and we do not need to retaliate to restore balance. The story of Joseph is a clear example. Betrayed and sold into slavery by his own brothers, enduring years of injustice, he chose forgiveness and help when he had the power to take revenge. He said that what you intended for harm, God used for good. Forgiveness sees the bigger picture, recognizing that even harm can be transformed by God into a higher purpose. Forgiveness is also the courage to let go of the right to demand an apology or compensation. It does not depend on the other person's attitude, but comes from the determination to live free before God. Sometimes people are not sorry, or there is no chance for them to say they are, yet the choice to forgive is still ours. And in doing so, we are no longer allowing their actions to control our emotions or our future. Forgiveness requires humility, because it forces us to acknowledge that we too have needed forgiveness. When we remember how many times God has erased our debt of sin, it becomes easier to erase the debt of others. Forgiveness is the greatest strength, because it wins not on the battlefield against an enemy, but in the quiet battle within our own hearts. And when that victory comes, it not only heals the wound, but also opens the way to a new life, light and full of grace. Accepting God's will is the meeting point between surrender and strength. It is not giving up or letting circumstances carry us away, but an active trust that He knows better than we do, and that His plans are always good even when we cannot yet understand them. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus faced the heaviest moment. Knowing full well the path ahead led to the cross and death, he prayed that if it were possible the Father would take this cup from him, but ended with the affirmation that the Father's will be done, not his own. That moment was not only obedience, but also a profound lesson on freedom. By letting go of the right to decide according to his own will, Jesus stepped into true freedom, freedom from fear, from the pressure to control everything, and from the burden of outcomes. We often cling tightly to our plans because we believe they are the best, but when everything falls apart, we realize it is God's hand that truly keeps the path safe. When Abraham was asked to offer Isaac, to his only son, and the fulfillment of God's promise, he did not hesitate. He did not know how it would end. But he knew that the one who gave the command was also the one who could keep his promise. Accepting God's will is seeing beyond the present, trusting that there is a larger picture being painted, even if we can only see a few strokes. Sometimes God's will means waiting, and waiting can be the most difficult test. But it is in that time that He shapes us, strengthens our faith, and prepares us for something better. Job lost everything, yet he could still say that the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. This is the height of acceptance, when our hearts no longer depend on circumstances to hold peace. Freedom comes when we understand that the final outcome is not in our hands. When everything is placed under God's authority, we can live with a quiet mind, even in the midst of turmoil, and from that quiet place, we see more clearly the path we are to take, not because every turn is visible, but because we know who is leading us. Accepting God's will is the key to a life no longer chained by fear and disappointment, because we know that whatever happens, He is the one who keeps His promise and leads us to the safest place for our souls. I have lived long enough to realize that strength and resilience do not come from a single moment of brilliance or a sudden, extraordinary decision, but from small choices repeated every day. The 6 principles Jesus left are not quick-acting pills, but the very breath and flow that nourish life from within: trusting God, praying without ceasing, serving others, holding on to faith in trials, forgiving sincerely, and accepting His will, all combine to form an unshakable foundation. I have seen people whose bodies were exhausted, yet whose spirits stood firm like solid rock. And I know it was not because of their own willpower, but because they had anchored themselves in these things. Trusting God each day is like stepping onto a bridge without seeing the other end, yet still walking because you know who built it. Praying without ceasing is like continually breathing the air of heaven so as not to suffocate in the dust of the world. Serving others keeps the heart soft and the hands ready, so we do not close ourselves off to the needs of anyone. Holding on to faith in trials is learning to see through the rain, to know the light is still there, even when the clouds are thick. Forgiving sincerely is laying down the burden so we can walk on lightly. And accepting God's will is knowing that even when the road is winding, the destination is still in the hands of the one who leads. I have come to see that when you live in this rhythm, you no longer have to ask yourself whether you are strong enough to overcome, because the strength no longer comes from you, but from the one who is within you. And one day, looking back, you will see that the storms that once seemed ready to destroy you became the very place where you learned what it means to stand firm. It is not because you are extraordinary, but because you chose to live each day in the arms of the one who never changes. And if there is one thing I want you to carry with you after hearing all of this, it is this: true resilience is not measured by how many times you do not fall, but by whether you continue to rise in the grace and strength of God. For when you do so, you will see that no day is meaningless, and no trial is wasted, for He uses them all to make you new.